Every year, close to 16,000 seasonal farm workers come into Ontario and are employed by roughly about 1,200 different farm workplaces. And so what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk a little bit, because it's a subset of the agriculture, occupational health and safety hazards in the agriculture community generally, but it's a very significant proportion of the farm workers that are represented. So their hazards and the issues that they're exposed to are really a mirror of the hazards that are typical of these environments. So I'm going to paint a bit of a stage for that. Talk a little bit at the broader level about what are the trends in terms of farm worker injuries. These are lost time injuries or injuries that have resulted in some sort of physical injury mostly. My colleague from the OCal clinic is going to focus more on the health issues that are initiated through some of the hazards and exposures that these workers have in their farm environments as well. And I'll talk a little bit about the actual, what does this look like in terms of the most common or the most prevalent risks that are causing these injuries among migrant workers. And then I'm going to finish off with one particular resource that we've developed in particular to try to support workplaces and these workers in terms of providing the education and the information they need to be able to be aware of the issues and to be able to work safely. A little bit about us. Valerie, I'm going to skip over this. We're a health and safety association. We get, like OCal, we're sister associations. We get a portion of our funding from the Ministry of Labor to support our activities. We also get some funding from the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs to support the development of some of these outreach programs for agricultural communities and workplaces and workers. We're a large organization. We've been around a long time, as Valerie said, and so we have a wealth of experience, and we have consultants across the province in communities, agricultural communities across Ontario. Valerie mentioned we're part of a health and safety prevention system in the province. Essentially, there's three pillars to the system. The Ministry of Labor at the top is a government group that is responsible for regulating and enforcing. These are the inspectors that are coming out for occupational health and safety to workplaces. The WSIB is the insurance side of the organization. If an injury were to occur, they're the ones that are supposed to be supporting the workers and assisting in getting rehabilitation and funding that lost time and those rehabilitation services. The blue side is, and OCal is another one, I just listed WSPS here. We're really the education support side. And although we're part of the same system, we're at arm's length. We're transfer agencies, so we work independent of the Ministry of Labor and WSIB. We get insight and we understand how they work together, and we work collaboratively in different ways. But when we're out working with workers or we're working with workplaces, everything we're doing is in complete confidence. So we don't have we maintain that confidence to be able to provide quality, objective services to the workers and the workplaces. This is really just giving a snapshot over the last 3 years to the end of 2014 of what the lost time injury trends are across the industries. Typically in Ontario, they break them different types of agricultural businesses into what they call rate groups. And so this reflects the different rate groups that are included in the agricultural ban. The two that are in the middle, 167, which is field crops, fruit and vegetable farms, and 174, which is tobacco and mushroom farms. The greatest proportion of seasonal farm workers work in those two parts of the sector. Occasionally some will work in livestock or in poultry would be another one. Some work in nursery growing operations in the landscaping and related, but again, the majority are mostly in field crop. And this is basically saying that over the last 3 years, you're averaging about 1.5% of all of those workers are going to experience a lost time injury where they have time off work because of the severity of the injury over the course of the year. And that's not the whole picture, because then if we look at the non-lost time, we start to see, well, the numbers start getting a lot higher. And so these are people that suffer musculoskeletal injuries or bad cuts or bruises, but they don't lose any time from work. But they're back at work, they don't lose time, but they're still suffering and needing to recover from the results of those injuries. And what you see is the numbers go quite higher, and so you would actually add the two together to get the total injury frequency. So again, if I looked at field crop and fruit, vegetable, or tobacco and mushrooms, field crop and fruit are getting up close to 5% of all workers are experiencing an injury on an annual basis. And in industries like tobacco and mushroom farms, it's really quite high, and it's getting up in the neighborhood of about 7 or 8% of all of these workers are going to have some sort of an occupational injury carrying out their tasks on these farms. And so that sets a bit of a stage for what's happening generally. What we tend to find in particular among the migrant farm workers is by far the most common, the type of work that they're typically assigned is very manual. And it's often carried out for long lengths of time every day, and they're often in awkward postures. They're not in ideal working postures while they're doing this work. So the consequence is they develop a lot of strains and sprains and musculoskeletal types of injuries, and that is probably the most prevalent among the types of injuries you'll see that are actually reported back to the workers' compensation, and probably represents somewhere between 40 and 45% of all the injuries. And one of the things, again, this is kind of the working wounded, is with these type of injuries, that even if they're not losing time from work, they're trying to work through the job, because oftentimes they might be on a quota system or something, so to get paid, they need to continue to do the work, and so they're working through a lot of this and needing to get access to appropriate rehabilitation and so on to be able to recover from that. The other major types of injuries, we see falls, not so much from heights, like heights being above 3 meters. There's some in the orchards that they have very high ladders, but by and large they don't work at what would be called working at heights, but they might be working at a higher level, like a meter up or something like that. The most common one would be maybe jumping off of a wagon or falling off of a wagon that's moving or not moving, or they're loading it, or a loading dock, and these types of things. So they can turn an ankle, they could suffer a broken arm on a fall, these types of things, or a lot of the landscape is very uneven, and so they could trip and fall just because of the terrain. A lot of, more so in the non-lost time, a lot of cuts and sharps from sharps, the types of tools they're using, the types of equipment they're using to carry out the work. The issue that's probably the most critical and can cause really debilitating injuries or has resulted in fatalities is around machinery and different. And what is characteristic, one is there's a lot of farm machinery and different types of equipment. There could be hoppers, there could be conveyors, there's these types of things. And oftentimes they're retrofitted, and some of the equipment's very old, and they're not properly guarded, and they maybe haven't had sufficient training on how to use that equipment and protect themselves when they're working around these moving parts and so on. So this is where you can get amputations, you can get some very severe and significant. So the actual numbers of injuries isn't as high, but oftentimes the severity is very high on these types of injuries. And the last one that's really prevalent is they're working for long hours out in exposure, and heat stress is a real issue. I'm sure my colleague will maybe talk about the issue, that's the occupational side of it, but needing to be aware of heat stress, the signs of heat stress, and what to do about it to keep them appropriately hydrated and protected and that sort of thing. is a big issue. And this is just sort of a cross-section. So when I was saying, in terms of those 16,000 workers that come into Ontario annually, the majority of them are primarily from Mexico, but also from the Caribbean, in particular Jamaica in particular has a very large proportion of these workers, as was represented by Camille in the opening remarks there. Typically, and I've done these in descending order, if you looked at the number of workers and what types of farm operations they're most typically working in, it's number one would be different types of vegetable crops, working in greenhouses, which could be vegetable or flower greenhouses, and then fruit and apples is probably it's a category in itself because it's quite big, and then tobacco's decreasing, but there's still a high risk, and they've kind of bundled mushrooms in there because mushrooms is a really unique animal, and you're essentially working in this dark, dank place, and they're climbing up. I could do a whole session just talking about the issues associated with working in a mushroom operation. It's really like working in a dark, damp basement and having to work very fast with a sharp object to gather up the mushrooms and tend to them. So as a result, again, our focus in the system, and this is the way we collaborate with groups like OCAL, is we principally look at what can we offer to these workplaces to try to help them educate the workers and so on. So our focus, in comparison to OCAL, who would tend to work more directly right with the workers through a lot of your groups, our conduit tends to be more through trying to get to the farmers, get to the owners, and get to maybe some of the agencies that are placing these people and provide them the resources to help them educate the workers through their conduits. And so what we identified was we had a lack of resources that were available in Spanish for this whole population, and considered both the literacy, the language, and also some of the cultural implications. And we were given kind support from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and were provided a grant over 2 years to research and develop a series of products. It's really a toolkit, and I just wanted to finish off talking a little bit about that. And so the whole goal here is to develop a flexible toolkit which would empower and provide people the resources to be able to better train and educate these workers, and provide materials that are accessible and usable by those workers themselves. And again, one of the first priorities for us was to increase the awareness of the actual farm owners and the people managing these operations. At the end of the day, they're the ones that are supervising the work, and they're the ones that need to be protecting the rights and making sure that the people that are working with them, these migrant workers, have the sufficient knowledge and they are getting the sufficient supervision so they're not putting themselves at risk. And so the first challenge for us is trying to educate them with this material, and then give them the tools and so on to be able to educate these workers. So we developed, this is just a summary of the whole package, and I put some cards. It's a bit of a summary of everything that's on this package. I put them on the corner, and we also have a table out in the front there just to talk about the things that have been developed into this package. There's a bunch of safety handouts. There's 46 safety topics, so we've identified what are the highest priority types of risks, work activities, types of equipment they're using, risk exposures. It could be sun, the types of things I was just talking about, but get very specific, and they're like 1-2 page information sheets, and they've been developed at about a grade 4, grade 5 level with graphics as much as we could, and they're available in both English and Spanish, and they've been reviewed by Spanish workers and people people from Mexico to try to address some of the cultural pieces. There's then a series of what we call 16 hazard-specific tailgate talks. And this is really about a 10-page tool to help a supervisor or an owner or someone at an agency or an interest group that's trying to provide education and support for these workers to help them facilitate a conversation with a group of migrant workers around a specific issue. So it's really a little training tool, so you can have like a 10 or 15 minute discussion around a particular issue, what are the hazards and risks it exposes you to, and how to protect yourself. The other two pieces here are more full-blown training programs. The first one, the health and safety awareness for seasonal workers, is a whole PowerPoint presentation with participant workbooks and everything. It's intended to be something that a workplace or an agency could use to orient these workers to the issues of health and safety. It also includes their responsibilities and rights in Ontario and how the system works in Ontario and things like that. It's about a 3-hour program, but you can tailor it because it gives you all the tools to facilitate that. And the fourth piece is an actual orientation for seasonal workers in the agriculture industry, and that's a video package, again with some support handout materials. And all of these are fully translated in both English and French, so we're providing the same guidance and advice to English-speaking as well as Spanish-speaking workers. And so you can, it allows farms to provide consistent, reviewed, appropriate information to help them understand these risks. I wanted to just give a little background. First of all, these resources, thanks to the funding we got from AMAFRA, these resources are all available for free. They're available because of there's video and everything on, so it's kind of late, and we were first going to, so the way our focus group said is, why don't you put them on a USB, and then we can plug them in a computer wherever we are, and we can pick and choose the pieces that work for us and how we want to use this material. And so that's the way we make it available. So on these cards, it gives you ordering information. The only thing we're asking is, you can only order one. We don't want you distributing them because we want to know who's got them, so that we can. We're now just getting ready to do an outreach and follow up and evaluate how's it working, because we've also had the Ministry of Agriculture approach us and they say, well, how about translating these into some other languages, because there are some other languages that are spoken on farms other than Spanish. And before we did that, we said we want to make sure these materials are working and are effective, and then we'll go back and say, yes, once we know they're working and this is a useful tool, then we're happy to invest that effort into making them available in other languages as well. The actual needs assessment was done with a cross-section of interest groups, and we had farmers that actually employ workers. We had the Mexican consulate. We had a number of migrant worker interest groups that also participated in a series of 2 focused exercises to say what should be in these packages, but in these toolkits, but also how should people be able to access this information. As I said, these were piloted, run again by some actual workplaces, and they brought some of their migrant workers into that focus group as well. So there was some workers and the owner-operator of that business that, and also some of the interest groups that piloted the material. We fine-tuned them. So far, since we launched it sort of middle of last year, we've distributed 426 of these. And if that's gone to 426 of the 1,200 farms that we know employ these seasonal workers, we're doing really good. But we don't know if they're being used yet or not. And we need to find out and hear from people. The other thing is, I know I was talking to some colleagues from Niagara who are actually out in the community supporting workplaces. These materials can be used by you and your interest groups and that sort of thing to help if you're providing education supports for, in the nature of the type of workplace or organization you're with, to support these types of workers, you're welcome to use these materials for those purposes as well. They're very flexible. Again, as I said, the next step for us is to evaluate the effectiveness of this program. Are people actually using the material, and how's it landing? Is it working? And that sort of thing. And ideally, we're hoping to have a couple follow-up focus groups around that as well. And if anyone gets them, we would really appreciate your feedback as well, informally, about it. So that's really what I meant to cover here. I'd welcome questions, thoughts, ideas. We're on a learning curve. This is a very complex issue, and we're making a contribution to one particular part of it, but which has to work together with all the other pieces to really work. But any thoughts, questions? Yes.
You said something along the line of like to increase the awareness of farm owners with health and safety. Do you believe that they are aware but just kind of brushing it under the table, or you wholeheartedly believe that they're not aware of those?
I don't think it's a black and white answer. I think it's a bit of both. I think there's some that, and we've been out to some, and they do a pretty conscientious job of the way they do it. And we've seen the orientation they're doing, and they've got some we've been out to, they have 50, 70 workers. They have the same workers coming back, and now they're bringing their kids back 26 years later. And so there are good examples, but then there's some really poor examples. So it's trying to get, and so one of the things we're trying to do in respect to that is we're trying to work with some of their industry associations and their groups and get some of their peers, instead of hearing from us. We're an independent, we're a health and safety association. Of course, we're going to say this is the right thing to do. But we need their peers in the industry telling them why this is a good thing to do. This is important to their business, it's the right thing to do. And that's the fight that we're trying to get their industry as a whole to take stronger interest in this area. Some of the ones like Tenderfruit, we're doing a bunch of stuff now specifically with the different Tenderfruit associations, and we've been running workshops for their farmers. We've got a whole program with them, and we've also got a program with the Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers. So we're trying to get through their industry associations and get them to set the standard for their members that this is the right thing to do, and make these programs available directly there, so their associations. We also have groups like AMAFRA, Soil and Crop, and the Ontario Federation of Agriculture that are strongly supporting this work as well. But it won't. You have to change attitudes. You have to create a culture where this is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for the workers. It's the right thing to do to continue to grow and for agriculture to continue to prosper in Canada as well. So.
Oh, I agree with you in regards to it's the right thing to do for workers. I just want to care as far as the farm owners, and this is just speaking from experience with clients that are coming to our workplace. Some of them from not being trained to use the equipment to getting hurt on the job, and them not saying anything, to even when they spray whatever, and they're not supposed to work for, I think it's like a suggested 13 or 24 hours or whatnot.
Yes.
And they're working 3 hours later, so they're inhaling all that stuff. They do tend to come back because it's either making what they're making now in comparison to where they're from. It's way more here, so they just suck it up. But I just don't think farm owners do care at all, but are very aware of the safety hazards. So that's why I asked.
So the hazard. So just, and I'm not disagreeing with you, because I think you're quite right. There's lots of farmers that aren't paying attention to this, but you're also saying what we did find is we did a survey, and we found, and it was a survey of workers and employers, and we found they actually, and we did the same type of survey, and they were telephone surveys and so on, and we found that they actually, compared to a lot of the other industries we work with, like we do the service industries and industrial, they actually have quite a high awareness of the risks, but that's not translating in behaviors, and they're not necessarily doing anything about it. And we're trying to unravel that a bit. Is that because they don't care, or they don't see the value, or they just don't know how to go about it? And if it's the how to go about it, we're hoping tools like this and the workshops we're running are going to help that group. If they don't care, that's the one where we need to try to find ways of putting some other pressures on them, such as the peers in your industry and that sort of thing. So it's an uphill battle. I agree with you completely there. Yes?
How involved is WSIB with regard to motivating the employers, the actual farm owners, to sort of following through with their health and safety programs, and particular to migrant workers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I'm really in a position to.
Yeah, they're presenting this afternoon, Ministry of Labor and
Yeah.
WSIB. But they do, WSIB doesn't, they don't drive prevention anymore, so they don't go
Yeah.
into workplaces. I mean, so they would be educating workplaces
Yeah.
on what their responsibilities are if and when injured workers
Yeah.
injured or ill, but they don't,
Yeah.
they don't do the prevention side. That's what the system is meant to do.
Yeah.
But there are monetary sort
That's
of
true.
That is.
Yep.
motivation there.
If the
Associated
claims
with
are,
WSIB,
yeah,
right?
if the claims are made. And
Yeah,
they're-
the
yeah,
claim
that's-
needs to be submitted, and so there's a variety of things, but it's dependent on, yes, you can be fined for not submitting the claim or
Mhm.
hiding the claim, but it's very dependent. What the WSIB's response will tend to be related to claims they've received, and how those are adjudicated and how those are followed up and all of those decisions. That being said, I'm going to context, and I have to be sensitive to my colleagues' time here. One of the things that OCal and ourselves are part of is the system recognizes this is a high priority. It's a high priority from a vulnerable worker, and I know one of our colleagues is over in another room right now talking about the vulnerable worker campaign. But we were involved in crafting an agriculture horticulture action plan for the prevention system, and for over the next 3 years. And that was just approved about 2 weeks ago. And now we each have, both of our organizations have quite a few pieces. We're each doing complementary things. But I think it's well recognized that there's a gap, there's a problem in Ontario, and it's a high priority. And the purpose of this, and there aren't very many action plans that are focused on a specific industry. That this is a specific issue, and we need better data, we need better information. There's a lot of different pieces to it. But we're hoping to measurably improve things and get it moving in the right direction over the last